It's an extreme escalatory phase, 3.5 plus years in. As you know, Trump says he's strongly considering giving them long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles. And Russia has said that that escalates into direct war, and they're basically calling it World War IV. The CIA called the Cold War World War III, so we are really in with all the ingredients we have with China, the North Korean troops being in Ukraine, all the different proxy countries involved. This really is a new world war. The only question is, will it continue to escalate?
It isn't every day where I can say that I agree with Alex Jones, but what you just heard him say in regard to the escalatory measures that the Trump administration is engaging in and considering doing more of is true, and we should be worried about it. Now, two things can be true at the same time. Trump can be pursuing escalation, which is not good. At the same time, Russia has rejected efforts to take a seat at the table and in good faith negotiate an end to this war. Now, Tucker Carlson agreed with Alex Jones's take on the Tomahawk missiles. These are long-range missiles, while making it very clear that he does not like Vladimir Zelenskyy at all. I think that's been clear since the almost beginning of this Russian invasion into Ukraine. Trump, on the other hand, has pulled, I think it's safe to say, a complete 180 on Zelenskyy and has been very supportive of the Ukrainian president while also being critical of Putin. So we'll get to more on that later, but first, here's more from the discussion that Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones had.
Why would the US government continue to recognize Zelenskyy, who's an unelected dictator who's worked for years to destroy Christianity in Ukraine, which is a Christian country and has always been? Why would he be invited to the White House this week? I don't understand. He does not have a Democratic mandate. He's not an elected leader. He's a murderer. They've sold our weapons to some of the worst terror groups in the world, and we're treating him like he's a head of state. Like, why are we doing that?
And just a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, he was back at the White House, and Trump then posted through social. And I love Trump overall, but Trump started doing a 180 from saying we need to get out of this, and saying, well, we're out of it, but we'll sell whatever weapons to Europe you want. And I feel like Ukraine's going to win, and maybe not just get back its territory, but get more territory, meaning Russia, which is an extremely provocative and escalatory statement to Russia.
So I wanted to fact check one thing that Tucker Carlson said, because I didn't know if Ukraine is a Christian nation, but it turns out, yes, 72% of the population identified as Orthodox, identified with the Orthodox Church, but whatever, that's an irrelevant point to this conversation. Everything else they said, I think, is interesting and worthy of a discussion. What do you make of it, Cenk? Because I honestly largely agree. Look, at the end of the day, Russia's a nuclear power, and you don't want the United States in a direct war with Russia, but we're certainly getting closer to that, especially as US military intelligence is going to be shared with Ukraine to do military operations on Russian soil, specifically to target their energy infrastructure. I think that's already entering incredibly dangerous territory. But what do you make of it?
Yeah, so this one's super complicated. So I'm not sure I'm in favor of sending the Tomahawk missiles, and the Russians have made very serious threats about that, which we'll get to in a minute. But you got to give Trump credit on one thing. Apparently, he's not working for the Russians. Look, I'll be honest. I was worried about that, and not because of the collusion in 2016 that we settled that a long, long time ago, but because him and his sons kept talking about money from Russia. He was acting so deferential to Russia, but here he is saying, I might give the Ukrainians Tomahawk missiles to strike deep inside of Russia. If you were owned by Russia, you definitely would not say that. And you would not do that, and you would not threaten that. So that seems settled now. And you have to go to where the facts are. You can't just go, okay, I don't like Trump, or I don't like Republicans, etc. Follow the facts, and they'll lead you to the right place. We're in the news business. So it's at this point, it's pretty obvious that Trump is not controlled by Russia. Am I a little surprised by that? Yeah, I am. Okay, but those are the facts on the ground. Okay, now we turn to what should we do? Well, Anna, something really strange happened when I posted about this on social media. So my account is followed by lots of different folks, bunch of MAGA, some extreme left, some normal, our viewers, who are left and independents, etc. But I'm also followed by a squadron of Israeli bots and trolls, right? So I post about, hey, it turns out Trump not owned by the Russians. Okay, I'm not sure how I feel about Tomahawk missiles, etc. Right? And they all have the same talking point. You anti-Semite. I'm like, wait, what does that have to do with Russia and Ukraine? That's already weird. But maybe they just hate me and they're like, oh, no wonder you love Russia, you anti-Semite. I'm like, no wonder I love Russia. I've told Putin to F off. We did a shirt about the, go F yourself, Russian boat or whatever. You remember that? No, the Russians invaded Ukraine. I'm for peace. So I'm against the people.
I'm calling it. Man, they're so good at telling on themselves. Russia is Iran's ally.
Bingo.
A weakened Russia by dragging on, by the way, I mean, at this point, Russia wants to continue the war, so I want to be clear about it. But there was a period of time in 2022 when Russia was kind of backed into a corner because they didn't expect the fight that the Ukrainians would put up. And so they were more open in 2022 to a peace deal. But if you guys can remember, Boris Johnson met with Vladimir Zelenskyy and discouraged him from engaging in a peace deal. And the main motivation for the United States and the West was, well, we want to weaken Russia. But why? Like, why do we want to weaken Russia? Like, I don't see Russia as a threat to our national security. Like, and when did we suddenly decide we're enemies with Russia? Well, is it because Russia is an ally to Iran? And if you have a strong military capability with Russia, it's going to be a little more complicated if you engage in a regime change war in Iran, right?
So Anna, no, you nailed it, because the part I was getting to is they said, of course you love Russia, you anti-Semite, and of course you love Iran.
I knew it.
I was like, Iran?
That's amazing.
What does Iran have to do with Russia and Ukraine, right? And remember, it's not just one, multiple accounts, because they all use the same talking points. Are all like, oh, you're in favor of Iran and Russia, et cetera, because they don't pay attention to the show. They're not paying attention to anything. They're just doing talking points because they're bots, right? Or trolls. So no, Israel wants to weaken Russia because Russia was helping Iran. And by the way, Syria. And with Russia distracted in Ukraine, Assad had no protection. And again, Assad's a bad guy, and I'm not in favor of Russia invading Ukraine because I don't have Israelitis, a thing I just made up, where you could only think about Israel. So for them, they're like, oh, must destroy Russia. They are helping Iran and Syria, must destroy them, right? Whereas I'm like, look, I judge things one by one. I didn't even know that Russia had anything to do with Israel. I mean, I get that they were allies with Iran and Syria, and we've talked about that on the show before, but I didn't think that necessarily affected the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and certainly not to this degree. But it appears that the Israeli lobby is driving America to stay in that war as long as possible, to weaken Russia so they can't help their regional allies. And Israel did in fact topple Assad, along with Turkey, by the way. And then Turkey took parts of northern Syria, and Israel took parts of western Syria. You would know that if we had real media in this country, but our national media never talks about that, and they never talk about this alliance. And so it turns out, yes, the Israeli lobby has been driving us to stay in this war.
There are few stories that enrage me more than the laundering of Al-Qaeda in Syria right now. The warm embrace of a former Al-Qaeda leader who's now the leader of Syria, as he came to the United States to be part of the UN General Assembly in New York City just recently. Like, how are people not infuriated by this? Because look, you're right. Bashar al-Assad was horrible in a lot of ways, but he was also a secular dictator, if that makes any sense. Meaning, Syria is pretty diverse in terms of religious belief, religious practices. And so part of the reason why you're seeing the internal wars breaking out within Syria between factions is due to the treatment of the Druze, due to the treatment of Christians. It's a complete and utter disaster. So the situation on the ground in Syria is unstable, to say the least. But in terms of my personal feelings about the whole matter, Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11. I don't care if you're now trying to rebrand yourself. Oh, I was an extremist Al-Qaeda member who was trying to kill Americans earlier, but I've changed my mind. I'm different now. No, I don't care. But this guy's now invited to the United States. He freaking stepped foot on US soil. It is, anyway, it makes me really angry. All right, let's move on. Now, Zelenskyy does plan to visit the White House this Friday. And according to the Financial Times, he and Trump will be discussing how to get Putin to the negotiating table. And in Trump's mind, threatening Russia by giving Ukraine long-range missiles, Tomahawk missiles, is what might get Putin to the negotiating table. But I don't think Putin is going to respond well to a threat like that. Ukraine, by the way, has wanted Tomahawk missiles since the beginning of the war. And the US government hasn't given it to them because, again, we're dealing with Russia, which is a nuclear power. And for reference, Tomahawks have a range of up to 1,500 miles. Long-range weapons that the Biden administration allowed Ukraine to use only had a range of 190 miles. And if the Ukrainian military had Tomahawk missiles at their disposal, they could strike, Russian territory. And here's what Trump had to say about the issue just yesterday.
They'd like to have Tomahawks. That's a step up. They'd like to have Tomahawks. We talked about that, and so we'll see. Well, I don't know. I might have to speak to Russia, to be honest with you, about Tomahawks. Do they want to have Tomahawks going in their direction? I don't think so. I think I might speak to Russia about that, in all fairness. I told that to President Zelenskyy because Tomahawks are a new step of aggression. I might say, look, if this war's not going to get settled, I'm going to send them Tomahawks. I may say that. The Tomahawk is an incredible weapon, a very offensive weapon. And honestly, Russia does not need that. They don't need that. Yeah, I may tell them that if the war is not settled, that we may very well do it. We may not. But we may do it. I really think that President Putin would look great if he got this settled. And I think he's going to settle it, but we're going to see. And if he doesn't, it's not going to be good for him.
Well, a spokesperson for the Kremlin stated that Tomahawks were a topic of extreme concern. And yesterday, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev wrote that it is impossible to tell the difference between a conventional Tomahawk missile and a Tomahawk missile with a nuclear warhead attached. Medvedev signaled Russia's response could be nuclear if Ukraine gets and fires Tomahawk missiles deep inside Russia. Now, obviously, that's a threat that should be taken seriously. However, a caveat or a counter argument is that since the beginning of this war, there have been multiple instances in which the Russian government has threatened using their nukes, and obviously they haven't. That being said, this isn't something to joke around about, and those threats should be taken seriously nonetheless. At least that's my take. Cenk?
Yeah, so Trump is threatening the Russians, and this is part of how he negotiates. I don't mind that so much. And he got some sort of deal in Gaza. I mean, we knew the Israelis wouldn't abide by it, but at least got the hostages back and on a road to peace. He's trying to get to peace in Ukraine and Russia. I'm worried about the Tomahawk missiles and how you can't tell if they're nukes or not. And even if you could tell, the Russians could use it as an excuse. And so, just because you're, like, for example, I see the Israeli lobby's effect on this war now, and it makes me want to get out of the war because it turns out it's just another thing we're doing for Israel. On the other hand, I have great sympathy for the Ukrainian people, and you look, Tucker said it was a Christian nation. I don't know what that has to do with anything, right? So I would have great sympathy for them no matter what kind of nation they were. And so look, with this thing of putting the Al-Qaeda guy in charge of Syria while the Russians were distracted in Ukraine, I agree with you completely, Anna. It's a disaster waiting to happen, right? So Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi were terrible guys, but deposing them led to a giant mess. It cost us trillions of dollars, thousands of men, hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians killed in Iraq and Libya. Slavery's back in Libya. In Iran, it was even worse when we did the revolution back in the 1950s, did a coup against their democratically elected government just so that our oil companies can make more money. Well, we set them on a track to be taken over by Islamic fundamentalists. And so this constant messing around with other countries, and yes, by the way, Iran, as far as I know, didn't have anything to do with Israel back in the 1950s. But did we attack Iraq partly because Israel wanted us to? Yes, Israel said they were their #1 enemy. Iraq, Saddam Hussein, as terrible as he was, used to fight against Al-Qaeda. And he would ruthlessly kill any Al-Qaeda that was inside Iraq. And Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11. Why would we want to take out the enemy of our enemy? Because they were Israel's top enemy. So we had to do it. We were forced into it. And so and where do we get our faulty intelligence on the weapons of mass destruction? Israel. So I'm sick of this. I'm sick of all American policy, especially foreign policy, being geared towards a different country. So I'm out, okay? I don't mind Trump doing this to try to get to a good peace deal, to get rescue as much land in Ukraine as possible for the Ukrainians. But then we got to wrap this up, okay?
Yeah.
I'm not fighting any more wars for Israel. That's it, I'm done with it.
And I want to be clear, look, I was very supportive of helping the Ukrainians defend themselves because at the end of the day, Russia did an invasion into a sovereign country to take territory, and that's wrong. But what frustrates me so much are the hidden motivating factors that ends up hurting everyone, including the very country that is supposed to be helped through our foreign policy, and of course that's Ukraine. But it wasn't helpful when in 2022, the West discouraged Zelenskyy to engage in peace negotiations. And that might have been the last time that we really had a real shot at a peaceful way of ending this war. So we'll see how this plays out. But it's
last thing. So the Russians can't tell if a Tomahawk missile is armed with a nuke or not. So we're gonna risk nuclear war so that Israel can topple the Iranian government easier. No, I'm all the way out. No, let's get out of there. Let's go. No more wars for Israel, period. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.